I had the pleasure actually of speaking last year in the AI in industry track, and I'm happy to be back discussing what's resulted in terms of actions as part of the mission that we highlighted in 2020. So our strategy out of the gate, as I discussed, was connect, elevate, and impact. So while we have many pockets of kind of a very talented data scientists scattered around the company, we really took it to heart to better create a community and a common identity surrounding data science with things like our company-wide data science conference and hackathons. Elevate can mean multiple things. We had an increasing amount of tech and academic partnerships. AMLD 2020 saw Chris Bishop and Sharam actually give a joint keynote, which was great. You check it out. We have continuing education in various forms through the Data Science Academy. And this is for practitioners and business leaders alike. And that second point is very important, I think. And we also have the AI for Life residency that you see mentioned on the slide. In terms of impact, I thought this audience would have particular interest in the AI Innovation Center. And actually a handful of our AI for Life residents reside in the AI Innovation Center. And so these are the two things I wanted to quickly highlight. So in 2020, I actually went into a one slider on each of our AI for Life residents pilot projects. I'm extremely pleased to say I can no longer do that. And here's why, actually. So we were able to deliver on the ambitious goal and promise of enabling opportunities with our most innovative experts as mentors across the entire value chain enterprise-wide at multiple sites. I hopped around actually to some of the virtual breakout rooms of the residents during the program overview event. I was just so impressed, I think, by the insight and focus some of the residents already possessed. And I think some of these had applied actually as a result of our booth and our presentation last year. So great to be here again this year. I'm not going to read through the list, but you can see we have projects in new therapies and reaching patients, in finance and business optimization, and some in general innovative methods. And that brings me to my next point. So in 2020, I highlighted our ambition to build what we referred to as the AI Innovation Center. And we have done so both in terms of people across multiple countries, sites, and most importantly, backgrounds, but also in terms of real business use cases and problems to tackle as we got started right away. And several of which are listed above on this slide here. So just like the AI for Life, we are operating across the value chain, but with a particular focus on the scientific medical core of the business. Last year, we mentioned actually coming together with Microsoft Research to tackle generative chemistry and AI optimization of small molecules. This year, we're actually delivering these insights in real time. So we're doing great progress. You can get a hint below that we're actually doubling down on our discovery activities by the amount of additional data types we're tackling below. We discussed last time actually the concept of human beings as the world's most complex data generator. And we've really committed to multimodal approaches for patient level models and modeling disease progression. And where appropriate, even building capability towards synthetic populations, say for virtual controls. And last, we want to make research and development and beyond more efficient, to better leverage what we know, benefit from our past experience, and we're doing this with our NLP and graph experts. So you can see we have not one, but a multitude of complementary groups that work fluidly together, and there's no shortage of business opportunities. It's more of a exercise in prioritization, actually. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to the two team leads so you can see for yourself firsthand. And just one quick note, and we'll finish with this slide also. To learn more about openings in the AI Innovation Center or the next wave of AI for Life, just start with the QR code and we'll get back to you. Bulent, Erik, happy to hand it over.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. My name is Bulent Kiziltan. I'm leading the Causal and Predictive Analytics group at the AI Innovation Center. I want to talk a little bit about myself, which talks to how we approach the whole data science operations at Novartis. I am trained as an astrophysicist. I have done black hole astrophysics for most of my career. And in that domain, I grew an appreciation for small data. We were analyzing sometimes very limited data, 10, 15 data points from which we were trying to extract information. And in the healthcare domain, we don't operate always with big data. We have limited data most of the time where we try to innovate. And on that end, I also would like to focus on how we approach problems rather than what we do in the limited time given. We work very closely with our partners from academia, from the tech industry, and try to really push the boundaries on the use cases that we work on. And we have a very diverse team that we work with. I'm very privileged to work with people who come from very different domains that really are critical for the operational success. And as Nick just mentioned, we really try to approach the problems from different aspects. More often than not, we are trying to come up with coherent and comprehensive methods that can augment the limited information and extract the underlying distribution for those effectively. And we really have to look comprehensively as to the whole problem, from using causal inference discovery methods, Bayesian networks, Gaussian processes, all the way up to multimodal methods that we implement into generative and contrastive learning methods. And I'll quickly hand it over to Erik in the limited time that we have.
Thank you, Bulent. So let's see. So my name is Erik Anderson, and unlike Bulent, and in fact, many people at the AI Innovation Center, I do not have an advanced degree in physics. Instead, my PhD is in visualization and scientific computation. And so from the moment I graduated until now, I've spent my entire career in the healthcare industry, whether it was at a small company like Electrical Geodesics, where we were making and manufacturing EEG equipment, to much larger companies like Philips and now Novartis. But in that time, not only did I work as a visualization expert, but I started to get into more advanced simulation and then modeling of the different problems from the perspective of AI and ML. And so I wanted to spend my time today talking a bit about what visualization is and what it can be, outside of the standard notion of bar charts and graphs and things like that. And so this image is coming from one of our OCT projects, so ophthalmology, where we're investigating the use of generative networks to generate three-dimensional medical grade imaging. And so this image might be a little bit confusing, but the left two columns represent ground truth and the right two columns represent generated images. And so while these things are really quite high quality, it's important to realize that the way these things need to work is we want to be able to control exactly how things get interpolated in our embedding space. So the images on the right are not generated with the inputs on the left. Instead, they're generated with the embedding points that our machine learning models are creating for these given four images. Additionally, we also want to explore, as Bulent said, multimodal imaging. And so this is, I think, a very nascent and growing aspect of machine learning, because it's starting to show that not only can we combine different imaging modalities together in unique ways, but the performance exceeds the sum of the two or three or four individual components that we use as our inputs. And then finally, I wanted to talk a bit about some of the visualization tasks that we're using. So this particular visualization is a manifold created by a machine learning embedding space. And so this is a space comprised of 100,000 molecules from the public CDDD dataset, and it is projected using UMAP to 3 dimensions. And so the very interesting part here is that we can start to explore these high dimensional spaces, not just in terms of something like clustering techniques or looking at discrete individual points, but we can actually start to learn what the shape of these spaces looks like. And while this is just a three-dimensional projection, we also have work going on where we're starting to explore what these things might look like in 2 dimensions, where we can start saying, well, if we have this point between these 2 classes, what does the actual decision boundary of this high dimensional space look like, both in terms of how it expresses itself in the 2-dimensional projection view, but also start to learn what this might look like in higher dimensions as well. So there are methods being developed where we can start lifting this space from the 2-dimensional projection and really getting visual information coming about what the shape of the space looks like in high dimension. And so this is, at least for me, this is a bit of a mind-bending task. This is not something that I think most people are at ease thinking or talking about. And so we really have to rely on some of these visualization techniques to help us here. And then finally, I just wanted to give a shout out to my team. Without their contributions, none of the work that we're doing is possible at all. And so now I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, thanks, Erik, and also thanks, Bulent and Nick, for the really interesting talk on your overall approach to AI and how you're sort of making the links both within and outside the organization. So, Erik, I have one question on the generative models. So, how would you, so typically, let's say, if you would have seen some patterns in the data, of which you could sort of derive the embeddings from and sort of generate an image that corresponds. How you typically deal with patterns that may not have been previously seen in any of the data sets that you would use to train your models?
Yeah, so the current application for this work is not necessarily to do generation for data imputation, but instead to increase understandability and interpretability about what the model is doing. And so the idea here is, instead of having a generative point go into the model for training, we use the generative images in terms of being able to allow us to provide more confidence that the nearby points of a decision are all generally looking the same.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And then a question for you, Nick, more on the AI for Life programs. Essentially, the intent is, if I understood correctly, the intent there is to bring in fresh graduates or let's say early stage researchers and embed them into the pharma kind of product life cycle, so that you could apply novel methodologies on solving the problems that you are facing on the portfolio side. So what has been, again, from that perspective, you have a few scholars who have joined the program. So what has been their impression of the program, and did they feel any specific challenges or any excitements that you could share with the audience here?
It was very interesting. I think they really enjoyed their time here. They were very successful, but I guess we hired the right people. One of them went on to do her PhD, and I believe the intent is to kind of build upon some of the research we've done here. And the other two actually both have full-time positions now in research. I can speak for the one. She came from more of kind of a robotics and imaging type background and jumped into generative chemistry because she thought it would be fun to really try something new, and actually she did a wonderful job and is now an official part of that initiative going forward. And so I think you hit it exactly on the head. The point of the program is to go out. I mean, it's complex in pharma, right? And it is to go out and enable people with these really solid technical theoretical skills to understand how to apply what they've learned in a real world setting to actually move the needle, to have some impact. And it's meant to help them jumpstart their careers. And one of the things we want to bring is this broader, bigger picture of pharma in the enterprise, so that they can make an intelligent decision on where they might like to start their career next. If that would be internally, we'll connect them with the right people, put them in the right forums, and help them learn how to, lead projects forward a bit more in a different applied real world setting. So, and I think the feedback we got was very positive. Of course, that's why we decided to double down and really, launch this very nicely sized and diverse 2021 cohort.
Fantastic, thanks. And Bulent, last question for you. I mean, you talked about like really this interesting angle of small data versus big data. Now, if we were to consider the trust that we could place on the algorithms eventually to be deployed in a hospital setting, we probably need broad, but probably not big data. So again, what are your thoughts on how do we kind of enable a transition of those algorithms to the clinical practice in absence of like larger data sets being readily available in healthcare?
Thank you, Asif. That's a very important question. The audience must have followed the news about some of the bigger tech companies moving out of healthcare very recently, and that's because the healthcare domain is incredibly complex and very difficult to operate in. And we know it's not all about technology. It's not about only of algorithms. There are multiple moving parts together that needs to be considered in that whole operation. So again, going back to small data, innovation nowadays happens in the small data domain more than the big data domain, because we are implementing some of the innovative approaches that comes from the applied mathematics domain into our operations and try to really stitch it together with our generative approaches. And again, going back to what Erik said about explainability, we are trying to implement that into our solutions that we are executing on for patients. So really understanding what's happening within the black box, make sure that we can extract information effectively from small data and look at the whole spectrum of small data to big data, I think is critically important in success in execution.